All right, so we're now beginning the book of Numbers, and let me give you a little context behind the book itself. Numbers is the English name for this book. This title is derived from the Greek name, and that most likely came from the first 4 chapters of the book. In the first 4 chapters of the book, we're going to see that God tells Moses to take a census of all the men who are of fighting age. That's 20 years and older. A census of all the fighting men from all the tribes and count how many they are. Now again, that's important too. It's also important to note that the fighting age of men was considered 20 and above, because that's going to come into play in a little bit also. The actual Hebrew name for this book is actually a better title. And the name of the Hebrew name for the book of Numbers actually translates to in the wilderness. In the wilderness. And that's essentially what the book of Numbers is. It is the time in the wilderness from beginning at the base of Mount Sinai until they are encamped on the outside of the promised land of Canaan. And so during that amount of time, we're going to cover about a year, a little over a year. During that time, everything that we kind of cut through and sift through tonight, if you were to read it all out, that would be taking place over the point of about a year. This book is the 4th book of the Torah or the Law. In the Greek, it's called the Pentateuch. Pentateuch means a 5-volume book. The Torah means the law. That's the Hebrew name, but this is the 4th book of that. These books were all most likely written by Moses. And it takes place immediately following the instruction of the laws and the ordinances for the sacrifices that God gave Moses. Now remember, he didn't just give him ordinances and all for sacrifices. He also gave him laws for living. He gave him laws for them as a brand new nation, becoming, having civil laws as a nation. God gave them ceremonial laws to do in the tabernacle for the cleansing of their sin and for the things that they would have to bring for being thankful to God. They laid out all of that stuff, and then also gave moral laws of just what's right and what's wrong. Can we go back to something to know what's right and what's wrong? All of that was kind of given to us. There was also a lot of talk about being clean versus unclean, or being pure versus impure, and being holy versus unholy. So do you remember what holy actually means? Set apart. So when you hear places in God's Word where God would say, "Be ye holy as I am holy," and we think, "Oh my goodness, there's no way I can be as holy as God is. There's just no way. I'm not able to do that." Why would God say to be holy as He is holy? Well, what God is saying is, I've called you to be different, to be set apart for a purpose. I've called you to be set apart from the world. And that's what He wants us to do. That's what that meaning of that is there for. Now, when we start in verse 1, the children of Israel have now been, or have been at the base of Mount Sinai for a year. Been there for a year. And so as we get to going through this trek, you're going to see, y'all remember Passover? Remember the first Passover was actually when the death angel passed over when they were in Egypt. And then during the book of Exodus and then going into Leviticus, they actually celebrated the first Passover. And so by the end of the book of Numbers, they're going to celebrate the second Passover, the second celebration of Passover. All right, so here it goes. We're fixing to start the trek to the Promised Land, the beginning of the trek to the Promised Land. And notice I did say the beginning of the trek to the Promised Land. The theme of the book, the theme is the gradual fulfillment of God's promises to the descendants of Abraham to occupy the land of Canaan. And it's going to end with them poised to do just that, encamped across the Jordan River from from Canaan or the Promised Land. The only problem is that due to some repeated delays, the trek that should take 11 days is going to take 40 years for them to make it. 40 years for them to make it from Sinai. So the book of Numbers is going to cover 40 years. Actually, it covers about 38 because we're already a year or so into their trek when we started. What did I just say? It's book of Numbers started a year after they've been at Mount Sinai a year. So they go, there's a little leeway there, and then they'll wander 38 more years, so it'll be about 40 years. The storyline of the book is designed according to the stages of their journey. The first section begins at Mount Sinai. This is Numbers 1 through 10, and can be seen as a continuation of the law giving that began in Exodus and continued through Leviticus. Then their story is going to continue as they set out and travel to Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. And this is Numbers halfway through Numbers chapter 10 through chapter 19. And then in those chapters, there's going to be some more law giving while they're at Kadesh. Then from there, they're going to journey to the plains of Moab. And then there's going to be a little more law giving at the end of that. And Moab is located right across from the Promised Land. All right. We're all introed up. Are y'all ready? Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of meeting, on the first day of the second month, in the second year, after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel, by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each of the head of his father's house. So, right off the bat here, just quickly go back to Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Y'all remember what I pointed out to you when we finished up Leviticus Sunday night? Remember that? At the first verse of Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1, the Bible says that God spoke to Moses from the tent of meeting. So God was in the tabernacle, but Moses was not allowed to be in the tabernacle. No one was yet at that point. God set up everything they had to do, and then they did those things. They made the atonement for sin. By the time we get through Leviticus, by the time we get through those things, we see now a different picture of Moses and God talking. Now they're talking, but they're both in the tabernacle. So God, it's a beautiful picture of man's failure and God constantly being willing to restore man. And we see that right there in that picture of Moses, to begin with, was not able to go into the tabernacle. And then by the time we get to Numbers, he's in the tabernacle. Moses is told to take a census of the fighting men from their tribes, their families, and their households. They're going to see this kind of continue through the first 4 chapters. This census is going to take place. Remember, this is where it got the name Numbers, the English name that we call it, the book of Numbers. This is why they did that. Now he'll take another census when we get to chapter 26, almost to the end of the book. He takes another census, but we'll cover that one later. But this is the first one, and it covers chapters 1 through 4 as they're doing that. He also took a census of the Levites and their families because they would be working the tabernacle. Their families would have different roles and things that they would do, the different families of the tribe of Levi. Some of them had to, whenever they moved, some of them would have to pack up the equipment, the stuff they used, the poles and the stuff they would use to move. They would have those. Some of them packed up the furniture, the sacred furniture in the tabernacle, and they had certain ways they had to do it. And so they were all trained in that. So they were all part of those different families that would do those different things. Now, this section, chapters 1 through 4, it continues the laws about how the tribes of Israel, well, actually, chapters 1 through all the way through chapter 10, it continues the section about how the tribes of Israel were to be arranged in the camp. The tabernacle. So, how many of y'all were with us as we went through Revelation? Y'all with us and went through Revelation? You remember that the walls, if you remember the foundations of the new heaven, the new Jerusalem, the foundations had the names of the apostles on them. But the walls, the gates of heaven, had the names of the 12 tribes. And there was 3 gates on all 4 sides of heaven. Now, we didn't know this for sure. We just kind of guessed that the layout, there was a layout in the Old Testament in the encampment in the wilderness that matched up to that. 3 tribes on each of the 4 sides of the tabernacle. That's how in chapter 2, God tells Moses to lay them out. And so when we were studying Revelation, I said that I bet that's probably where the way the names are listed on those gates was because that's the way they were laid out. So here's what you had. On the east end, or where the entrance to the tabernacle was, you had 3 tribes that encamped there. The children, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Then on the west side, on the opposite side, you had Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. So let's see, if that's west and that's east, then that's north, right? Oh, come on, that's... So on the north, you had Naphtali, the tribes of Naphtali, Asher, and Dan. And then on the south, you had Gad, Simeon, and Reuben. Now, something cool that I found when I was studying this that I had not heard of before, and you're not going to get this straight out of the Bible. So this comes from some Jewish rabbinical history, some history books within the Jewish communities. But we do know from chapter 2 that God tells Moses that each 3 groups that were around the tabernacle, that each group of 3 had a leader to that group. So the 3 on the east side, Judah was their leader. The 3 on the south, Reuben was their leader. The 3 on the west side, Ephraim was their leader. And the 3 in the north, Dan, the tribe of Dan, was their leader. So what we find from studying this, and now too, the tabernacle's in the middle. So anytime they stop and camp, the tabernacle's in the middle. The priests and the children of Levi, they encamp around the tabernacle. And then the tribes start folding out like we talked about around them like that, okay? So that's kind of how it's laid out. The groups of the tribes would carry their banners for their people, for their tribe. The different banners would have a logo on them. You know, you think about that when you would watch the old movies with the King Arthur going into war or whatever, and as the kingdoms would carry their big crest, their family crest or their crest on it, their coat of arms on a big banner. Well, they according to Jewish history, they did that as well. Well, if what the Bible says, you know, is true, Judah was the leader of one group of 3. His logo and his banner was a lion, and that's what Jesus is called, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. All right. On the other side, Reuben, his was a man, was a picture of a man. On the west end, Ephraim, his was a picture of an ox. And then on the north, the tribe of Dan, the leader of that group of 3 tribes, the tribe of Dan, his was an eagle. So the logos that surrounded the tabernacle was a lion, a man, an ox, and an eagle. Does that make your spidey senses start tingling? Yeah. If you've heard that somewhere before, right?
It was a combination.
Where have we heard that before? In Revelation, and then also in Ezekiel and Revelation. In Revelation chapter 4, as we were studying through Revelation, we saw the 24 elders around the throne, and we also saw the 4 living creatures, which were angels, were special angels who were there worshiping in the throne room of God. And the 4 faces of the 4 living creatures was a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. Now, when Ezekiel saw it, he didn't say ox. I think he said it said a beast or it said something else, but it most likely translated that was to an ox when Ezekiel saw the vision of the same living creature. We're told in Hebrews and in Revelation that the tabernacle and the way God laid that out for Moses was a representation of what heaven was going to be like. And so how amazing is it that the leaders of the tribes that would be on all four corners carried the same logo as one of the faces of the angels, one of the four living creature angels that constantly are around the throne in heaven all the time. I just thought that was cool. So. All right, so let's go to, I can see y'all were riveted like I was. Let's skip ahead to, so like I said, this section is chapters 1 through 10. Let's go to chapter 9. Go on ahead, skip on ahead to chapter 9. We'll get into there's some cool stuff in here. We'll get into some cool stuff in the book of Numbers. There's some wild stories in the book of Numbers. I preached out of the book of Numbers one time shortly after I started as youth pastor here one Sunday when I got to preach. And when we get to that chapter, you'll probably realize, why would you have picked that to preach on? So chapter 9, we see that they celebrate the second Passover that we talked about. I mistakenly said I thought it was towards the end of the book. It's not. It's right here. So look at chapter 9, verse 14. The Bible says, "And if a stranger dwells among you and would keep the Lord's Passover, he must do so according to the rite of the Passover and according to its ceremony. You shall have one ordinance both for the stranger and the native of the land." Now, why in the world am I having you read that verse in the story of the Passover? Well, we've talked about the Passover before, so you kind of have an idea of what that is and why they celebrate it and everything. But this is what I thought was cool. In their journey in the wilderness, we realize that this group is not only Jewish people. There are some Egyptians that we find that went with them from Egypt, that wanted to go with them, that they had made friends with, that wanted to go and go with them. There are some that married Egyptians, and so there's some that have their family is part Egyptian. They also will pick up different strangers and sojourners and other people in this area who would join in them to go with them through the wilderness. And so God here, as He's given Moses these the continuation of the importance of the Passover, He even says, listen, if you have people with you who aren't Jewish, they can celebrate with you. They can celebrate God and what God has done with you. And so that's what He's talking about there in verse 14. The remainder of chapter 9 tells of the divine guidance system that God used. And you remember what that was? It was a cloud of smoke, a cloud by day, and a pillar of fire by night. When the cloud and the fire, whether it was day or night, would stay put, then everybody stayed there. They stayed wherever it was at. When the cloud or the fire started moving, they started packing up, got everything packed up. 3 million people now. Think about how long this would take. And get everything packed up, and then they start going with it. They start going in that direction. So God was literally GPSing them all the way to the promised land. Now look at Numbers. Oh, and does anybody know what the cloud, what the cloud presence of God that was there, what that's called? What we call that? It's the Shekinah. Heard that word Shekinah before? It's the Shekinah glory. Shekinah glory of God. That was the same. They said that was the same cloud because the name Shekinah actually is translated "walks with me" or "he walks with me," and so that was that Shekinah glory. We typically attribute that to just when the cloud would come down at the mercy seat but it was also they also recognize that as God being with them when they saw it over the tabernacle and as it was leading the way. Still in chapter 9, look at let's read verses 20 and 21. I'm sorry, 21 and 22. 21 and 22. So it was when the cloud remained only from evening until morning, When the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they would journey. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud was taken up, they would journey. Whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year that the cloud remained above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. But when it was taken up, they would journey. So that just tells you there that that's that guidance system. When it was taken up and it would go, then they would go. When it stayed, then they stayed. All right, chapter 10. Roll in chapter 10. Now, in the first part of chapter 10, the Bible is talking about the trumpets and them using these trumpets. That kind of ends up the first section. Now, look at verse 11 of chapter 10. Now it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai on their journeys. The cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So here we've got, let me read one more verse. So they started out for the first time according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So now this is the first time they're leaving Mount Sinai. Everything we've just seen, all the census, all that stuff, that had all taken place still there at the base of Mount Sinai. Now the cloud is moving. They're packing up. They're heading on. They're going, and they settle down in Paran, the wilderness of Paran. Now, they stopped at a place called Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea and the wilderness of Paran, if you were to look those up, they don't all, some maps don't always show them in the same place. That's because there were several different places that had the name Kadesh, but the wilderness of Paran was kind of in one area, and there was a Kadesh in there, and so that most likely was where they were at. Now, this is the beginning of their journey, and this is the beginning of their journey for 38 years when, like we talked about earlier, it should have taken 11 days. Why did it take so long? Bunch of crybabies. This book is also called the Book of Wondering. But it also should have been called the Book of Complaining or the Book of Griping, because that is literally what they do. Go to chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now when the people complained, must have been Baptist. Now when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. God's anger got a little ripe there and caught some of them on the outside of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and we see that then when Moses prayed to the Lord, the fire was quenched. This is the beginning of what gets to be a cycle that happens for years. We probably won't touch every single time that they complained as we go through the book of Numbers, but they murmured and complained over and over and over. They would complain. God would send some sort of punishment because of their complaints. Moses would pray. Sometimes they complain about Moses. Moses would pray and ask God to forgive them and to save them, to spare them. God would be merciful, and they would repent, and they would go, and then they would complain, and the cycle started all over again. This entire book, you see this cycle of the complaining and all. Look at verse 5. This is the people talking to Moses. We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt. No, you didn't. You was a slave. You was an indentured servant working for the man. We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. It was kind of potent. But now our whole being is being dried up here. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes. So we're going to see them continually mention how good they remember it being in Egypt and how horrible it is now. Sometimes we have to fight our flesh sometimes in oh man, remember what it was like before I was saved? Remember when I felt like I could just go do whatever I wanted to do? Remember how good that was? God says, you don't realize how much bondage you were actually in. And if you and to think about going back to that, but that's what they were doing. They were romanticizing. They were remembering the old ways in a much better way than it actually was.
Blood ties instead of chasing your treasure.
Yeah. Say that again.
Said missing the mud pies instead of
chasing your treasure. We're gonna put that. I'm gonna put that as the caption on the video whenever I get this one up. Hey, by the way, guys, I am way behind. I haven't even finished Genesis in getting the ones put up on YouTube. So at some point, I'm gonna try to sit down and get all that caught up. But if anybody in here is like, hey, I'm good with like uploading videos, getting stuff on YouTube, being able to put like a thumbnail on it and this sort of stuff, I can help you out with that. Come see me. Come see me. All right.
It's ringing bell every Tuesday.
Right. All right. So the complaining continues and gets contagious. It moves through the camp. Look at chapter 12. Chapter 12, verse 1. 1 and 2 says, Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. Now his own brother and sister are arguing or complaining with him because of the Ethiopian woman who he had married. So now, y'all remember, Moses' wife's name was Zipporah, and she was from Midian, where Moses had run away to the backside of the desert. So at this point, Zipporah has died, and his Ethiopian wife was most likely the wife he married after Zipporah died. And so Miriam and Aaron do not like her. And so they spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. I love that parentheses in verse 3, because you know who wrote this book, right? Moses wrote the book, and he's telling you he is the most humble man on the earth. He is the most humble. There's not another man as humble as I over all the earth. That's what Moses said. So the complaining just continues. It continues. And then look at chapter 13. Now we're fixing to see really why they ended up stuck for 38 more years. So we get, this story is probably well known to us, who especially those of y'all who've grown up in church. So they're at the border of Canaan. Moses picks 12 spies, one out of each tribe of Israel, and he sends them to go spy out the land. They go to the land, they see what's all there, they come back, they give their report. Joshua and Caleb come back, they're carrying this huge thing of grapes, pomegranates, all this stuff that they got from there. 10 of the spies say, we can't do this. Those people are like giants. They're going to eat us up. There's no way that we can do this. 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, we know their names. We don't know any of the other ones' names. But Joshua and Caleb are like, listen, God has given us this land. This land truly is flowing with milk and honey like Moses told us it would. We can do this. Basically they're saying if God is with us, who can be against us? And they're saying we can go take this land. But the people talk amongst themselves and they just absolutely refuse to go into the promised land. Look at the end of chapter 13, I'm going to read you verses 30 through 33. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are all well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people who we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, came from the giants. And listen to this part. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Now I want to make a point here. There's a reason that in Timothy, Paul tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear. Because fear is something that we all deal with. And it's different than just being scared. But having that spirit of fear, that doesn't come from the Lord. And this is a good example why. Those 10 spies said, listen, when we looked at those people, in our eyes, we were like grasshoppers. And we think that in their eyes, we would be like grasshoppers too. And I say it that way because when we get the report of where the spies stayed when they were over there in Jericho. When we get into the book of Joshua, we're going to read Rahab talking about the people of Jericho and her city, knowing that the children of Israel had come through the wilderness and were there. And the Bible tells us that Rahab says that everybody, all of the men in her, at least in her town in Jericho, that their hearts melted because they were scared of the Israelites. God had made a way for them to go in and take the land, and they refused because of the fear that was in their hearts.
The thing that they didn't know, that they didn't realize, that they saw themselves as grasshoppers. Grasshoppers is a form of locust.
Yeah.
Okay? And when you look back in Numbers at the beginning, you see the number of those that were given.
Yep.
They were 603,550 men of fighting age.
Yep.
600,000
Yeah.
men. That is a horde of locusts. And so if they would have just took that and went with it, there's no way they could have withstood against that type of numbers.
Yep.
Because at the time that was a big.
It was a big group. It was a huge.
But they did not follow through with that
Yep.
grasshopper thing.
Yep. Grasshopper. So, chapter 14. And that rolls us right on into chapter 14. And that's a great point, brother. So now they refuse to enter Canaan. And we see in here in the first couple of verses, they mention worrying about their wives and their kids. Well, guess what? What they're fixing to find out is only their kids are going to get to see it. And then they tell Moses, we should have just died in the wilderness. Careful what you tell God that you shoulda, woulda, coulda. Because all those men 20 years and older, all those people 20 years and older that refused to go in and do what God told them to, every one of them are going to die in the wilderness, just like they said to Moses. Matter of fact, the only families that would be spared of the people, the first generation of people, is Caleb and Joshua's family. Caleb and Joshua's families. So God tells them through Moses that they are going to wander now 38 years in the wilderness, and that the people that refuse to go in, that they're going to die in the wilderness, and that their kids are going to be able to inherit the promised land. When Moses tells them that, then all of a sudden they say, whoa. Well, maybe we can do this. All right, let's get an invasion. Let's go. And then they say, okay, let's try it. Well, it's too little, too late at this point. God's already turned them around and said, no, you're fixing to wander for a while. And so God's already had his mind made up of what they're going to do. Well, they take a group and they try to go invade, and they get defeated and ran back and actually ran off when they try to do that. Quick note, Psalms chapter 90. If you want to turn there, Psalms chapter 90 was written by Moses around the time of what we read happened here in chapter 14 and chapter 15, and them refusing. I didn't mark it, so if you get there before I do, you can read a couple of verses up. We don't have to read the whole chapter. Psalms 90 says, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains you were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting. You are God. You turn man to destruction and say, return, O children of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday, when it is past, and like a watch in the night. You carry them away like a flood. They are like asleep in the morning. They are like grass which grows up. In the morning it flourishes and grows up. In the evening it's cut down and withered. And this is where we get the where is it? This is, I believe, is the scripture where he tells us to teach me to number my days. 12. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. All right, so that psalm was written by Moses at this time. Now, go to chapter 16. Y'all, I don't know why it's so hot in here. Some of the air is on.
Where? Melting.
I'm telling you. I'm surprised somebody hadn't come in here and went ahead and just said, let's do this. Oh man. Chapter 16. We might move this outside.
Then we'll complain as to when to get too far.
Yeah. All right. So let's roll through this, and we'll try to speed up a little bit. Okay. If y'all see something you want to stop me. So chapter 16. This is where we record the Korah incident. The Korah incident. So this man named Korah, him and 250 other guys, they thought Moses and Aaron had too much authority, and so they came to him basically for a showdown. And said, we want to challenge you for the authority, for hearing from God and from the authority. Aren't we all called? Aren't we all set apart by God? So why is it just you guys? We want to challenge that. Moses says, listen, if you die by natural causes, then I'm wrong and you're right, and you guys can take authority. If you die by natural causes, okay, I don't, sometimes Moses says some things that you're just like, huh. Okay. But he says, if you die by some crazy circumstance, like, I don't know, the ground just opening up and swallowing you, then you'll know that we really are who God called to do this. And lo and behold, guess what happens? They all die naturally of heart attacks. No, the big sinkhole literally opens up and gobbles up Korah and all the 250 guys that were with them, and then the ground closes back up. So just craziness. And then the people get mad at Moses because they're like, you asked God to kill these people. And Moses is like, that really wasn't what I was doing, guys. But, okay. And then so in chapter 17, then the leaders of the tribes, the 12 tribes, then they come up and they're like, hey, we want to challenge Aaron. Why is he the one that's the high priest? Why can't one of us be the high priest? And So here again, more of the same, more of the complaining, more of these issues. And so they say, Moses says, God says, all right, this is what you're going to do. Moses, get a staff from the main dude of all of the 12 tribes, get Aaron's staff, put them in the tent of meeting, put them in the tabernacle. And if one of them buds, then that's the one who's going to do it. Well, we know what's going to happen, right? Because we know that God has called Aaron to do what he's doing. But they take all of those, the rods or the staffs, and they put them in there. The next morning they take them out. And Aaron's has not only budded, but it has a fresh almond growing on it. So we know that Aaron's staff was made of whatever tree grows almonds, right? Or whatever an almond was back then. Sometimes they call things, the Bible calls certain fruits and things names when actually it was a different one. But I think this actually was from an almond tree. I've never seen an almond tree, so I wasn't sure what they look like. And so this happens now in my Bible study, because I've been studying my personal Bible study. I'm trying to stay kind of everything together. And I was listening to this lady named Tara Lee Cobble, who does the Bible study that I'm listening to on my YouVersion Bible app. And she said that actually an almond branch can bud after it's been cut off from the tree. But it has to be left in water. I don't know anybody in Madison that should be calling me right now. But it has to be left in water and in a humid climate. Now, what do we know about the desert? It's an arid climate. It's dry. It's hot. There's no water in there. And the Bible doesn't tell us that they put it in water. So this was a miraculous thing that God caused to happen for Aaron's rod to bud a leaf, and then also an almond, a fresh almond. And then do what? If he ate the almond? I don't know. He might have. Now the rest of this section, which goes through chapter 19, is just more laws that Moses has given them. And he's going over more things, duties of the priests and the Levites. When we get to chapter 20, we get into the next section. And this is where they start to leave again. And now they're going to the plains of Moab. They're getting closer back to they're still in there wandering, but they're getting back closer to the promised land. Thank you. My brain just kind of shut down there for a minute. Chapter 20, we see at the beginning of chapter 20 that Moses' sister Miriam dies. Oh, I forgot to tell y'all too. When Miriam and Aaron complained about Moses, God struck Miriam with leprosy. Now, we remember from Leviticus that every time we see leprosy in the Old Testament, it's not necessarily leprosy that's incurable skin disease that will, that your skin starts rotting off. Sometimes it's other skin conditions that are all just lumped in together with the name leprosy, right? So we see that God strikes Miriam with leprosy, and her skin turns like white, like a sheet. And so Moses, after she just complained about him and complained about his wife, still goes and prays for her to be healed, for God to heal her, and God has mercy on her and heals her. But now she has passed away, and so they're in another water situation. Y'all remember back in Exodus, they didn't have any water. Well, first of all, they got to the place where the water was bitter, and God told them what to do, and the water became sweet. And then they got to another place where they were out of water, and they were complaining. And God told Moses, strike the rock, and that when you strike the rock, the water will flow. Well, now they're in another water situation. Now, God is telling Moses to speak to the rock, but Moses is very angry with the people. And you kind of read it in his words. Look at chapter 20, starting at verse 7. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. But there was a consequence. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, there before you shall not bring this assembly into. Therefore, my bad, y'all. Let me just start that verse all over again. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. This was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. He said, listen, you were fixing to show. The people had already seen a show of might striking the rock and getting water from it. You were literally fixing to see that just speaking my name has power. We don't know exactly what Moses was told to speak to the rock. He may have been just told, hey, rock, I need some water. It might have been all he was supposed to say. But I got a feeling he was going to call on the name of the Lord. That's Jeremy's version. You preach it the way you want to when you get up here. I mean, no, don't really. But I think he was fixing to show them that there was power in the name of God, even the name of God. And he got up there and he got mad at them. These sorry jokers have been complaining like they've been complaining. So he took that rock, and not only did he hit it once, he hit it twice. And God blessed him, and the water came out, but then he had to pay the price. And he says, listen, you're not going to lead them into the promised land. Matter of fact, you're not going into the promised land. He lets him see the promised land, but he sees it from the hill right before he dies in the end of the book of Deuteronomy. All right, so then they got to move on. The people right by them are some of Esau's descendants called the people of Edom. They refused to let the children of Israel go through there. Wonder why they did that? Edom's like distant cousins to the Israelites. Why do you think they didn't want them to come through there? Well, Brother Ivy just mentioned the fact that they kind of were like locusts. There was so many of them, right? There's probably 2 to 3 million people. Can you imagine what that many people just walking through your land
with their livestock
probably would do to your natural resources? So the people of Edom were like, nah, y'all ain't coming through here. We have to feed our own people. We ain't feeding y'all too. So they wouldn't let them go through. And then we get to, then we find out that Aaron dies. Aaron passes away, and then he's gonna ordain his son to be the next high priest. Moses will. But then we get into another round of complaining. Go to chapter 21. Start with me in verse 4. And they journeyed from Mount Or by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. Now, the way this is read, The soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. If you go back to the original Hebrew and translate that actually is better translated, that the soul of the people became very discouraged because of the way. So all these things that they've been through, all these things that have happened, all these things, even though they've seen God's mercy and they've seen His hand move, all through this, the things that they've been doing, they've discouraged the heart of the people, the soul of the people. Verse 5 says, "And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread." Man. Dadgum. I mean, you've seen the things that God has done. You saw him kill Aaron's two sons in the book in Leviticus that we read Sunday night for going in and offering the wrong kind of fire or strange fire to the in the Holy of Holies. You've seen what God has done. He's given you this manna, and you basically just told him that this bread from heaven is worthless. I don't like it. Matter of fact, I hate it. I can't stand Moses. I don't care that he's your appointed man. I don't like it. Matter of fact, I think this bread you're giving us is worthless. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Now, keep this in mind. We're going to see the snakes. We're going to see fighting. We're going to see plagues. We're going to see things that kill people throughout this time in the wilderness. Remember, God told them, they refused to go in the land. They said, "Won't you just let us die in the wilderness?" They're going to die in the wilderness. Not all of them are just going to die of natural causes or old age. Some of them die because of other things like this. So some of them died when they got bit by the fiery snakes and the serpents.
You think that's a dragon? Fiery serpent? It's kind of interesting.
It is. It is. I still kind of lean into it being a snake. But definitely a poisonous snake. Yep. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people. And many. I mean, you think about rattlesnakes. You think about what they do with their venom, and how you get tissue death. Like almost immediately, the tissue starts dying where the venom is, and then if it gets in your bloodstream, I've never been bit by a snake. Praise God, and I hope I never do. I don't want to. But my brother-in-law was one time. Bo's daddy was one time, and I remember that night still. Well, you took him to the ER and had him back there in the. And should I tell that story or no? I better not tell that story. Remind me afterwards. He was more scared of his mom-in-law putting the catheter in him than he was. She's a nurse. She's a nurse. She was working. He was more scared of that than he was the snake. Yeah, right. Sorry, Brent.
Running up his arm.
Do what?
He said it felt like fire running up his arm when he cut it loose.
Yeah. Said it when he cut the tourniquet where he had wrapped it. Said it felt like fire running up his arm. So these I feel like these are we got to get the train back on the rails. This I feel like probably was most likely a venomous snake. But then he says that the Lord sent the fiery serpents. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that He take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live." So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Now, the bronze serpent did not cure the people. The bronze serpent was what they were told to look to so that God would do the healing. I think it is really cool that Jesus actually references this in his discussion with Nicodemus in John chapter 3. John chapter 3 verse 14 and 15 says, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have eternal life." And of course that's the verse right before, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son." All right. Next couple chapters gets weird.
Question.
Yep.
Is that where the symbol for the medical profession comes from?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So the symbol for the medical profession A lot of people date it back to an actual pagan statue of some I can't remember the name of it now. It's some god of healing or something. But it also is do what?
Is it Medicus?
No.
Greece,
It's
Greek symbol, wasn't it? Greek.
It might have been. I want to say it started with an H, but I'm really not sure. But this and that, those two things kind of, I think, together is kind of what people through the years had decided to use that. But if you look it up, most things will tell you where it is that it came from, and they don't reference this unless you're specifically trying to tie this in. And then there are a few people that say that this played a role in making that symbol for the medical profession, but they do lean a little more to the other.
Okay.
Next couple of chapters get kind of weird. Balak and Balaam and the donkey. Y'all know that story? So Balak is a neighboring king. He doesn't want the children of Israel coming in, and he's scared of them. He thinks they're going to defeat them. He goes and finds this sorcerer who's been able to speak blessings over people and speak cursing over people. Balaam is a weird dude in the Bible, okay? Because he definitely has powers that come from a spirit. And there are times when he honors God and won't go against what God tells him, and God speaks to him, but the things that he does are not from God. And so it's like, okay, but the story goes like this. So Balak the king wants Balaam the sorcerer to curse the children of Israel so they'll die and they won't take over their place. Balaam says, okay, pay me and I'll do it. They meet up. God tells him, hey, you're not going to do it. He tells Balak, you're not going to do it. Balaam says, come meet me again. Goes to meet him again. Ends up meeting him 3 times. Same thing all 3 times. During one of those times, Balaam's donkey stops and will not go forward. Balaam's beating him. He's fussing at him. He's cussing at him. He's carrying on. What's going on? Why won't you go? There is an angel of the Lord, possibly Jesus, but there is an angel of the Lord standing in front of the donkey, and the donkey can see it, and Balaam can't. And all of a sudden, the donkey turns to him and says, would you leave me alone? Can you not see this angel standing in front of us? I'm not going near that dude. And Balaam says, and this is what's funny, because my thought would have been, you can talk? And Balaam goes, you've been my donkey for a long time. We've been together for a while. Why are you doing this? He starts having a full-blown conversation with his donkey. And so long story short, Balaam, God tells Balaam not to go do it. Every time he tries, God blesses them. But Balak keeps trying to go back. And then in chapter 25, Balaam tells Balak away. Now you're not going to read this in 25. You're going to read it in chapter 31. Balaam tells Balak, all right, listen, I can't curse him. Right? God won't let me speak curses on him. I can't curse him. He said, I'm not going to go against God. 22 through 24, read those chapters if you want to read that whole story. Balaam says, I'm not going to do it. But I'll tell you how to get them. Go to the Midianite women that worship Baal and infiltrate the camp with the women. And when the men see how beautiful they are, and they start having affairs with the women will lead them into idol worship, and then that will break the spirit, that will break down the children of Israel, because they'll be going against God. And in chapter 25, that's exactly what happens. Chapter 25, the women from the Midianites come into the camp. The men start having relations with them. They in those relations, they are worshiping the false god Baal. All this is going on. God strikes them with a plague. 24,000 people die because of this plague. And then finally, the grandson of Aaron says, I've had enough. His name is Phinehas. He says, I've had enough. He probably remembered the time when his dad took, and we didn't cover this, but his dad took a his incense, his censer, and put incense on it and burn it, and he offered it before God to stop one of the punishments that God was doing to pray for the people. He said, I'm going to do something. And he literally had just seen one of the leaders of one of the tribes take one of the women and go into his tent. And so he takes his spear, he walks into the tent, and he stabs both of them straight through them. And so when he does that, God stops the plague. This is what I preached on a long time ago when one of the services I preached for brother Tim years ago. God's serious about sin. He is. He's serious about sin. When we've allowed sin to come into our life, He wants that sin. When we fall into that habitual sin, into that, He wants us to deal with that sin. And if what we have to do to deal with that sin is drastic, then it's just drastic. Jesus was teaching and said, if your eye offends you, pluck your eye out. If your hand offends you, cut your hand off. And that's kind of what he's saying. So do we go around and stabbing people who are in sin? No, that is not at all what God was getting at with this. But that's what had to happen at this time in this place, because the worship of the false gods had to be stopped. That had to be wiped out before they ever could go across into Canaan. There would be enough issues with them dealing with the people in Canaan that if they brought issues with them, they would have never made it. And so God had to have that cleaned out. And so that's why that happened. Chapter 26, there's a new census that is done. Chapter 26, this census, the old generation has now died. And nobody from the old generation except Joshua and Caleb's people are there. And one thing that's pretty cool, if you read the number of people that are taken, the total fighting people, 20 years and older, fighting men in that census, it's 600,000 again. It's a very similar number to the one Brother Ivy read from chapter 1. And that number is literally only about 1,000 people difference. So God literally restored everybody that had to pass away. God restored them for them to have the same number, essentially, for them to be able to walk into the promised land. 27 through 31, chapters 27 through 31, there are more laws given on the plain of Moab. Look at chapter 31, verse 16. Oh, I went past it. Hold on. 31 verse 16 says, look, wait a minute. Let's back up. 15 says, and Moses said to them, have you kept all the women alive? He's talking about the women that had came over in chapter 25. And he says, look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor, that was Baal Peor was the false god that they were worshiping, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. So that's how Balaam, when he couldn't curse them, he said, I got another way that we can get them and kind of let this sin enter in the camp. Chapter 32, chapter 32. We find here that Gad, the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh. These tribes had more sheep, more livestock, and the land they were at right now in Moab on the east side of the Jordan River, they had to cross over to get to the promised land. That was good grazing land and good land for those sheep and all. And so this 2.5 tribes, they come to Moses and said, hey, can we stay here instead of going over into the promised land? Can we just stay here? Can this be our inheritance? And Moses at first, I can just imagine Moses is like, are you flipping kidding me? Right? Moses is probably just beating his head. He's like, your parents refused to go in, and that's why we wandered in the wilderness for another 38 years. Now you're going to refuse to go in? You are not keeping us from going in here, you know. But Moses tells them, he's like, listen, if you'll send your fighting men in with everybody else to fight, clear the land, and get the inheritance for the people, then your fighting men can come back and you guys can have the east side of the Jordan. You can have that land. And so the guys were like, yes, that's cool. We are totally fine with that. We'll build fortified cities. That's where our women and our children will stay. We'll put up pens for our livestock. We'll go with you in there. We'll fight with you. And that's what they do. And so they end up being, those 2.5 tribes are called the Transjordanic tribes of the children of Israel, because they did not go into the promised land and settle for their inheritance. They stayed on the other side. Go to chapter 36, and we're done. Chapter 36, verse 1. Chapter 36, verse 1 says, Now the chief fathers of the families of the children of Gilead, the son of Mashir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of the sons of Joseph, came near and spoke before Moses and before the leaders of the chief fathers of the children of Israel. Is that what I meant to read? I think I put the wrong reference on there. No, I think I meant 13. Sorry, the last verse, not the first verse of that chapter. These are the commandments and the judgments which the Lord commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. So now they're sitting here poised, ready to go, ready to enter the promised land. And that is the book of Numbers in a nutshell.